This is the Presbytery. 130 churches of all shapes and sizes. It was Sunday, the Lord's Day, and I was working night watch out of the Commission on Ministry when the call came in. There's a branch of ministry that's growing, but nobody seems to know about it. That's where I come in. The name's Thursday. I carry a camera. I went to the source, the co-moderator of the Task Force on Commissioned Ruling Elder Oversight and Training, R.C. Griffin.
When did this idea of a commissioned ruling elder begin? 1984. A couple of presbyteries, rural areas. It was hard to get pastoral leadership in these kind of rural churches. So they petitioned their presbyteries, who petitioned GA. And at that point, they were not called CREs, Commissioned Ruling Elders. They were called CLPs, Commissioned Lay Preachers. And the original intent was to be able to provide lasting leadership in small congregations, particularly in rural areas. But our experience in the time now is that more and more churches can no longer sustain a called and installed teaching elder.
Then I talked to Griffin's Task Force co-moderator and Commissioned Ruling Elder, Rachel Brooks, and Jody Lingen, Presbytery Staff Resource.
For a while, it seemed as though they were using Commissioned Ruling Elders as a way to come into a church that probably was not going to make it because they were losing members. And just a way to kind of get them through till the end. And I don't think that's so much the case anymore. Because most of the CREs that I know are not there to provide hospice care. But they're there because they really have a call and they want to see that church thrive.
One question kept bothering me. How does a person become a commissioned ruling elder?
Assuming that they are a ruling elder themselves, they go to their session and kind of talk through that. I feel like I may be called to this ministry. And if the session kind of agrees with that, they would apply to the CRE program through the presbytery. If we're kind of all in agreement, then they would be admitted to the CRE training program. That training program is anywhere 9 to 12 months. They would then spend about a year doing an internship in a congregation. And at the end of that would come before the task force once more to kind of do a final assessment to make sure that we feel satisfied with their training.
It was time to cut to the chase. Why are there so many more CREs now than ever before?
2.5 years ago, when this position was first created, the one that I occupy now, one of the first things I did was I looked across the presbytery to say, okay, how many churches are installed? How many are uninstalled? And first thing I discovered is 90% of folks don't know what installed means. So installed, those are churches where the session has agreed to call a pastor, given that information to a presbytery, who then commissions and calls that pastor. In this presbytery 2 years ago, 55% of our churches were uninstalled. Now, 2.5 years later, 57% of our churches are uninstalled. 15% of all of our pastors, if you will, are CREs. And what I hear more than anything is, well, I wonder if we should stay installed.
With the background information in place, it was time to start talking to some CREs themselves.
I got dragged to church when I was 13. I didn't want to go, but after 2 years, I was the only one in the family going. And then I was ordained as a deacon. Then when I was about 22, I went through the PCUSA's Volunteers in Mission program and came east. To serve at Grandfather Home for Children, just for a couple of years. And here it is, 30 plus years later. And I was called on to preach there. It resonated with people when I spoke, and I realized that the Spirit was speaking through me. Formal training was through the Church Leadership School at Western Carolina Presbytery, classes that you would expect only in a perhaps more abbreviated form or more compressed form. So we had Shirley Guthrie as our theology text, Bible, holiday, worship service types like weddings and funerals, Christian caregiving. And we had pastors who would come in and they would be our teachers. And they would be, and we'd have theologians come in and teach our Reformed theology. So I am the engagement pastor, the parish engagement pastor for Parish E, which is the western part of Salem Presbytery. Pastors need a pastor. Pastors need somebody to call and say, so how's your walk with Jesus? How are you doing today? What does this week hold for you?
I even found a CRE who is a police chaplain.
About the time I was getting ready to retire from state law enforcement, before I retired, I actually started taking some classes at University of Dubuque Theological Seminary because I was selected by my home church as an elder. After taking those classes, I realized that it was what Presbytery requires to be a CRE. A local police department, Grand Police Department, didn't have a chaplain. And I was commissioned to that validated ministry. Being retired from law enforcement, the officers know that I guess I've been there. I understand their perspective too. I've been called into officer-involved shootings. I might have an officer walking down the hall stop me and we have a conversation. So I think a lot of the chaplaincy is just being there, being seen, being available.
Commissioned ruling elder Rachel Brooks found herself in the most unusual of transitions.
For a long time, I was a chemist, and then I was a mom. Eventually, I became a non-denominational pastor. The pandemic came, I retired. First church I visited after the pandemic was a PCUSA church that was just down the road from our farm. While at that church, the second week I was there, found out the pastor was terminal.
While he was able, he was into everything. You know, he'd always say, everything's going to be all right, everything's going to be all right. But, you know, later on, when he kept getting weaker, he just wasn't able to do a lot.
Doug was a personal friend of mine before he ever pastored the church. And it hurt everyone as his condition deteriorated over the years. And it really became an unbearable burden at the end to watch his decline.
Rachel had lived in this neighborhood for years, and we never knew her. Then one Sunday she comes, and it's just like she has always been here. And as Doug, you know, he was worried about the church. And when Rachel started coming and he was talking with her and everything, he said he knew the church was going to be okay because the Lord had already picked her.
To make a long story short, Jody came to visit right after his passing, and I was filling in the pulpit thinking they've got to find somebody. And then Jody said, well, were you an elder? And I said, yes.
And we couldn't have got one any better than what we've got.
I think so too. I think we were blessed in that situation.
She gets everyone involved. Anything she asked, we do.
Right.
We don't ask questions, you just do it.
And you don't feel imposed upon when she asks. You know, it's a joy to do something.
Just like you're here today.
That's right. That's right. And you think of CRE as, my definition of that would be a part-time pastor. When you think of Rachel, you don't think of anyone giving part-time of anything. She's 100% effort on her part.
To me, a CRE is the same thing as a pastor. There's no difference. They still do the same work that the Lord wants them to do. When it comes to sickness, she's there. All you got to do is pick up the phone, and if she is here, she will be there. A CRE is a minister. Whether or not they've got the degree or whatever they need, there's no difference.
And I think we're going to be seeing more people who think they're retired coming back to these smaller congregations and using what they've learned in the past to go forward.
I even tracked down two of the first commissioned ruling elders in the PCUSA.
The first time that I really served a congregation in an extended way was Lansing Presbyterian Church. And we did that together. And then about a year ago, Larry retired, so that now I am generally 3 or 4 weeks a month. I really felt that all of the opportunities that God had given me and the lessons I had learned were things that I could share with other people to encourage them to use the gifts that God had given them.
The most joy a minister can have, I think, is to watch as the aha comes to a member of a congregation, and you realize that, yeah, you help to bring about that aha and to nurture it from there on.
Well, I quit going to church when I was 15, and I went back to get married when I was 43. Then my daughter Kate came along, and so we were thinking about, well, we need to go back to church. We were welcomed with open arms. I was given a whole bundle of bulletins. The minister, Dr. Keith Huffman, said, here, make yourself useful and pass these out. Then later on, he said, you need to teach a class on the Psalms, you know. And I said, well, I don't know anything about the Psalms. He said, well, here's a book. And then the lay pastor program opened up. Keith gave me the opportunity to preach the early service. My mouth would get so dry, I couldn't even talk, you know. The inner urging is still with me, you know. This is something I'm supposed to be doing as long as I can.
It's just a camaraderie, a friendship. It's having somebody that you can call and talk about things if you need to. We meet together at least 4 times a year. There's some churches out there that can't afford a full-time installed pastor, or that 40 hours a week isn't really needed necessarily, and you can still have a robust ministry. I see the beauty of the Presbytery's connectionality is installed ministers of Word and Sacrament not only mentoring CREs, but learning from CREs.
I didn't know what a CRE was. I didn't know if Richard was a ordained minister or CRE or what.
I did not know what a commission ruling elder was. I thought maybe he had been in the ministry his entire career.
About a year and a half ago, my mom fell and broke her hip. And she had surgery on a Saturday morning, and Richard showed up at her hospital room in Chapel Hill. And that really impressed me.
My investigation revealed that these impressive pastors also have some concerns to share.
I think adequate training is really important. I think realism is very important. If a CRE thinks 30 hours a week is going to do it, think again. Sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 60. Be flexible. Listen to people. Don't be too strict, you know. Cut people a lot of slack. And then maybe they'll cut you a little slack too.
A lot of times the church is looking for installed leadership. I've heard a few saying that they will settle for a CRE. I don't think we should look at CREs as a second-rate form of leadership.
I kind of feel like we've lost our first love. The Presbyterian Church has always been about mission, changing hearts, that kind of mission. We want to provide medical care. We want to provide education. We want to create justice, bringing people into the family of God, making disciples, evangelism, of sharing the good news of Jesus in such a way that people can say, I want that, I want more of that. How do I find that out?
Maybe the church just doesn't have the answers yet, and we all have to seek for it. How can we re-energize ourselves spiritually to be willing to make the church a priority in our own lives, and more than that, to be willing to share why that's a priority to other people? We need to be able to teach everyone to be able to more clearly communicate and enunciate and meaningfully share what their faith is to them and why the church is important to their faith.
Teach the CREs really modified versions of how to lead worship, what our polity is, the sacraments, a basic Reformed theology, but not how do you lead change.
I think that your ordained pastors better get used to us. We're not there to take your job. We are there to work with you. We can use your experiences, and perhaps you can use ours.
What began as a strategy to fill a few pulpits in remote locations is now an increasingly common way to provide pastoral leadership to churches who no longer need or can afford a full-time installed minister of word and sacrament. With this new trend, training becomes an even more vital requirement. Presbyteries need to provide excellent preparation for those called to this ministry. Teaching elders are called to recognize and include commissioned ruling elders as colleagues. To sum it up, commissioned ruling elders are special people called to a special and growing ministry. They need to be celebrated for their service. Presbyteries need to renew their commitment to quality preparation, and installed teaching elders are called to include commissioned ruling elders as colleagues in ministry.